The Prime Minister dismisses the noises off over welfare reform. But tonight we can reveal that the noises are that a compromise is very much on over cuts to PIP. Is the government in control? We'll speak to one of Starmer's leading critics within the party. Meanwhile, President Trump heads back to Washington after NATO allies get out the chequebook with a new defence spending pledge of 5% of GDP. We'll ask a defence minister where the cash is going to come from. Good evening, this is Newsnight, brought to you live every weeknight around the world from Broadcasting House with the best insights and interviews. Later we'll have an update on last night's Newsnight special on Britain's nuclear test survivors, which was raised at Prime Minister's Questions today. Our panel this evening, Labour MP and Mother of the House of the Commons, Diane Abbott, Distinguished Fellow at Defence think tank RUSI and long-standing Conservative Minister Alistair Burt, and the Assistant Comment Editor at The Telegraph, Poppy Coburn. Today saw more Labour MPs coming out against the government's welfare reforms ahead of Tuesday's vote. Nick's here with some of the latest developments.
Well, Faisal, in Parliament this evening, you could definitely sense that something was cooking. So the Chancellor was visibly engaging with MPs for some time. And senior number 10 aides, these are the ones who you wouldn't tend to see in Parliament unless the Prime Minister was there. Some of them were walking the corridors on their own without the Prime Minister with very serious faces. Now, I understand that talks are underway between the government and the rebels on two key areas. So the first one is a demand to remove from Clause 5 of the bill, this is the most controversial bit, remove what is known as the 4 points threshold for existing claimants of personal independence payments and a review on this for future claimants. So these are the rules which mean you have to score at least 4 points in each area to claim those PIPS payments. The second demand is to delay the universal credit health cuts. The rebels say if this goes ahead, this will make severely disabled claimants worse off by £20 a month. And one rebel source tells me we are moving closer to the government, made offer on the 4 points, that's the test issue. But it's still in very vague terms from the government and, crucially, not signed off by the Treasury.
That PIP thing that you mentioned, that potentially extremely costly in terms of the public finances. And so what's the mood and where does this leave the Prime Minister?
Well, Faisal, I spoke to a lot of MPs today. I'm going to tell you three big things I noticed. One is absolute despair amongst the most loyal of Keir Starmer supporters that he's got himself into this position. This is what I was told. One of them said to me, Keir Starmer has absolutely no political credibility amongst what should be his young, new, energised supporters. And from another one, this is somebody who is on, a member of the government. They're saying it is bad. It is so bad. I'm not sure they, number 10, could have created a worse situation. It is so bad you almost have to admire their artwork in creating such a hopeless situation. The second thing is very strong criticism of Morgan McSweeney, who is the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and his team of what is described as boisterous young men. One person said to me, they're running round like extras in the thick of it. And finally, I understand that the government whips warned number 10 of a problem on welfare 9 months ago. And the view is that the whips have simply not been listened to in number 10. And there is a widespread feeling across the party that Keir Starmer has bungled his relations with his whips, bungled his relations with his backbenchers, and a lot of chat of a complete overhaul of his political operation.
Well, I spoke to the Armed Force Minister, Luke Pollard, about the rebellion the government's facing and asked him if Labour ministers were losing the argument with their own MPs.
I think the vast majority of the changes that we're proposing will be wholeheartedly supported by colleagues, but there are some concerns about changes in particular around PIP. Now, we have, as a government, between now and Tuesday to listen to those concerns, to address them, and then when the vote happens on Tuesday, we'll put the case forward that reforming our welfare system, helping rescue people from the trap that so many of the most vulnerable people are in at the moment is the right thing to do.
There's almost no controversy over the idea that you get people into work, saves money for the taxpayer, good for the economy, win-win all over the place. But isn't the issue is that this was a money-saving exercise in order to make the budget numbers add up in March, and some of the reform elements were not funded? Isn't that the issue here?
These welfare reforms that we're making still mean we're spending an additional £16 billion by the end of the Parliament on welfare. So we're increasing welfare spending, even notwithstanding these changes. But I think if we allow a system that we know is failing some of the most vulnerable people, and allow that to continue, that's not a government that's fixing stuff. That's why we're trying to fix Britain, to fix the welfare system, and these are difficult decisions we're having to take.
But it's not the fix, is it? It's been money. It's an upfront money-saving exercise to fit the borrowing targets. You've lost people like Toby Perkins just now, and Meg Hillier. These are committee chairs who back the reform agenda, but don't like the idea of cutting so much money up front, which is what this is. It was a money-saving exercise to hit your budget targets, and now you face massive U-turns.
Well, the conversations need to continue. I know the whips are doing so. I know Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, who leads this policy area, is meeting folks with concerns. I think it's right that people listen. I don't think we've had anywhere near enough focus on how we fix a welfare system. I think it's right that we're taking difficult decisions to try and fix it.
But by taking the benefit away, by taking the PIP away.
Well, 9 out of 10 people that are on PIP today will still be on PIP by the end of these changes.
Hundreds of thousands of people losing thousands of pounds, including probably 1,000 or 2,000 in your own constituency. They're sending in letters non-stop to MPs, and they're under pressure. I mean, what does it say about the authority of a government that was elected with a massive majority that you U-turn on one major policy and you look set to lose your majority on another major fiscal policy?
Well, we were elected on a platform of fixing the deep-seated and deep-rooted problems that the country is facing. There's 1,000 people a week going on to PIP. There's nearly 3 million economically inactive people in our workforce. There's 1 in 8 young people that are not in education or employment.
PIP's not about in-work benefit. PIP is paid regardless of whether you're in work or not work. You know that, and that is precisely where the concern is. And you said just a moment ago, you suggested that maybe you would listen on the cuts to PIP. Is that right? Is that where the listening exercise is? It's specifically on PIP?
Well, I think that's for many colleagues where the real concern is, and there's a wide range of views, as you'd expect.
You're giving a hint here as to where things might go?
No, I'm basically describing what the conversations are taking place at the moment, and it's right that those take place.
So there are conversations going?
Of course there are, and they will be right up to the vote.
What's it like to be the minister sent out to defend this policy, which probably you'll get a text message by the end of the interview that it's been U-turned on? I mean, how does that make you feel?
Well, as a defence minister, I spend most of my time talking about the threat from Russia and Ukraine. Yes, so certainly talking about something that's not about that is a bit different.
Let's talk about defence then, right?
Well, we'll just pause that for a minute. We will talk with the Minister about defence, and we'll hear what he said about defence a little later. But let's pick up on this issue of welfare and the rebellion. Dan Abbott, you're a signatory to this famous reasoned amendment. What are you hearing?
Well, the rumour's been going around for about 48 hours that they're trying to put together a deal. But how successful they'll be, I don't know. And even if they do a deal, the point about the welfare cuts is a lot of the MPs that have signed that amendment have very narrow majorities. They have more people on PIP in their constituencies than their majority. And unless you've got something credible, you can go back to your party members and your constituents. It's not going to help you.
OK, but there is, I mean, your amendment at the top of it says that all the signatories back the idea of reform.
Oh, yeah.
And you've seen the ballooning bill for health-related benefits. It does imply spending less on those benefits at some point. You just want those savings to come more organically rather than being taken away from people at the beginning.
Anyone that's got anything to do with the welfare system, no, it needs reform for a number of reasons. And we do have to restructure our welfare system. But what the government is doing, they're going to take the money away first, the PIP money in particular, and then possibly put some money in, maybe in the next financial year, to support people to go back into work. And we're arguing that's the wrong way round.
Right, so in other words, you don't take the savings out and use it to get your budget, hit your budget target.
Exactly.
You recycle it straight away in order to help difficult to place people back into, say, part-time work.
Exactly.
So that is what you're looking for very specifically.
That's what we're
and you
looking
think
for.
that there will be a deal on that basis?
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know what sort of deal they think they can get away with. That's the deal they should offer, but let's see.
So, Alistair, you lost the whip during a rebellion. It was once, but it was fairly spectacular. I seem to recall. What would you do in this situation on both sides, as a rebel and as a member of the government?
Well, two things. Firstly, once you do threaten people with losing the whip, it often makes people stick to their guns even more, and that was certainly...
Well, and to be clear, we haven't got there with this yet, have we?
No. So the government has to be very careful about how it handles its MPs in this position. I was also a welfare minister 30 years ago, and we came into office 92 to 97 after John Major's election, and we knew that if spending on social security continued to increase at the rate it was, the government wouldn't have any money to spend on anything else. And so we embarked on a process of curbing access to benefits, because it's much easier to curb access than it is to take money away from people.
So you're talking for future recipients?
That's right.
This is the famous Lord Lilly point.
Indeed, absolutely.
Yeah,
well, Tony Newton, the great Tony Newton, said, don't take money away from people's hands. But the honest truth is, once the bill starts to get too big, a government has got to do something. And MPs who feel strongly about it have got to answer the difficult questions as where else would you find the money, and how is your government going to survive if it takes a catastrophic defeat on something like this?
The government has to answer difficult questions.
Oh, yes.
But why haven't you consulted with people more thoroughly? That's what a lot of people are complaining about, not least disabled people and the organisations to represent them. There's an issue about the lack of consultation.
Well, I've no skin in this particularly. I don't take any involvement in domestic politics. My experience was the past and the pressures facing a government. But Diane is absolutely right. If you lose the confidence of your MPs and if they feel you're not listening, you're in difficulties. But what is the government supposed to be listening to? Where the bill is going or how it's going to tackle it? It's a really difficult time for the government.
It's just worth bringing Nick back in here, because actually that sort of that formula of limiting future eligibility to the PIP, that might be something in the detail of what you're hearing.
That's what the rebels are looking for. Yeah. That this 4-point testing where you've got to get 4 points for each area. Yeah. They want that not to apply to existing claimants, but they said yes, a review, so maybe it could apply it is worth just unpacking that a little bit, isn't it? There's a whole series of characteristics that you qualify for, and the line is quite... Well, the two examples are, if you can't pull up your trousers or you can't go to the loo unaided, that's 2 points and 2 points. But those 2 points and 2 points don't make 4 points to get you past the...
Under the system.
It's 2 points there, 2 points there, you don't get it.
So you need one sort of more severe 4-point score. So we think that they might be trying to get rid of that, essentially. That's clause 5.
Okay,
that would be extremely costly. What do you make of that, Poppy?
Well, I just think this is a classic case of just bad politics. I mean, this whole discussion about the need to reform the welfare bill is completely correct. But why the government is facing this rebellion in the first place, I think a large proportion of the backbench MPs who feel they can threaten a rebellion is because of the U-turn that they did over the winter fuel allowance. Now, what concerns me is that have we entered a time warp and gone back to 2019? If we have a government with a massive majority that got into power after a decade and more of Tory chaos, where very basic zero-sum decisions that need to be made in politics are the only ones that are worth actually making, that are going to upset some people, couldn't be made. And they are proving already that they can't make those decisions, and they are going to get frightened, and they are going to make large concessions over what was a very small saving.
Winter fuel was a small saving, but this would be 5 billion potentially.
Look, it's significant money.
But seems like quite a lot of money to me.
When we look about how much money has been added onto the welfare bill just since COVID, it's actually just a drop in the ocean. So we're going to have to come back to this issue in a couple of years' time. What will be different then? Do we think Starmer's going to be more popular? I don't.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because in going for the budget target, so the origin of this policy is in March, heading to miss the budget, her own budget targets, looking for that 5 billion upfront saving. But then you may face the situation where the two big fiscal decisions, you can't get them through Parliament. Let's take a clip. In fact, Keir Starmer was challenged on this by a Daily Mail journalist at the NATO summit. Let's just see what the Prime Minister said in relation to his future in this question posed by David Wilcott from the Daily Mail earlier.
On welfare, Why have you so spectacularly failed to read the mood among your MPs over this issue? Is it because, as your critics suggest, you don't have the political nous and judgment required for the top job?
You won't find many Labour MPs who are not accepting we need reform. So we're absolutely on the page with them. And is it tough going? Are there plenty of people and noises off? Yes, of course. There always are, there always have been, there always will be. But the important thing is to focus on the change that we want to bring about.
Faisal, shall I just say that noise is off remark? Well, sorry, let me...
Talking about his MPs, his colleagues, as noises off, is partly why he's in the problems he's in. Noises off.
Yes, I spoke to one loyalist who said that noise is off was reminiscent of Jim Callaghan famously not saying crisis, what crisis. He didn't say it, but it was the headline, I think, in The Sun after he came back from an international meeting, Guadeloupe, I think it was. But I would just say, I mean, the government's view is that after COVID, the number of sort of disability claimants benefits went up, and you've got to bend the curve and bring it down because you want to get people into work. And on things like PIPs, there's a lot of people, mental health claimants on that, and what you want to do is provide therapy. You want money to be spent on therapy, not so much on benefits. That is the view of the government that you need to reform. What the loyalists are saying is there's a really good case for reform, but the problem is this looks like cuts, and even the loyalists are saying that's why they're struggling.
It is cuts. It's Rachel. It's Rachel. She's got to hit her target. It's cuts, and people know it's cuts. The public know it's cuts, and that's why it's so unpopular.
Yeah, but I mean, she's set her non-negotiable target.
Yeah.
You acknowledge that that's what's driving this. So what gives then? What gives?
Well, something has to give. Something has to give, because otherwise a lot of my colleagues are going into the next general election and are going to lose, because this is wildly unpopular with the public.
This is interesting, isn't it? Because we hear news from number 10 that their polling says that it is popular with red wall voters. Now, I mean, people say this to back up whatever they happen to think.
Yeah, I know.
From what I can see, but it's popular to crack down on this.
But it's not just a question of popularity. Isn't this precisely the reason why we're in such a bad situation? Because politicians only talk about this is a short-term decision that's being made because people are too afraid to do long-term reforms, because they will sometimes be mean and they will sometimes be difficult. And so if they cannot get this through the line...
Right? They really... I mean, they're pulling the plug on like hundreds of thousands of people who would get thousands of pounds worth of PIP. It seems like both can't be true.
I'm totally not underestimating the impact this is going to have. The problem is if you're going to cut PIP for certain numbers of people, I mean, you can't live large on PIP. This is not a large saving. But too many people are on it.
Why are we taking billions of pounds from the disabled, but perfectly happy to spend billions and billions of pounds on nuclear armament?
Look at this, and as if by magic.
That's what some of us say.
As if you've segued perfectly, and it's almost like we planned it into the next part of our discussion, because tonight President Trump is on his way back to Washington after he and key NATO allies, including Keir Starmer, agreed a commitment to hike defence spending to 5% of GDP. When I spoke to the Armed Forces Minister Luke Pollard earlier today, I asked him how the UK could possibly afford to spend the equivalent of an additional $60 billion a year on defence, at least some of which is due to go on a dozen US-made F-35A fighter jets.
So the NATO pledge that's been made today increases the core defence budget to 3.5% of GDP in 10 years' time, but it also includes 1.5% of GDP that should be spent on resilience, because frankly, none of the NATO nations are resilient sufficiently.
But these are huge sums, even the move from 2.5 just over 2.5 to 3.5, add on the 1.5. What gives? Taxes higher? Are you going to have to cut in other areas? Be straight with the British people. If we're going to spend this on defence, which you say is essential, we're going to have to squeeze other areas.
Well, we'll need to spend more money on defence to meet the threats. It's for the Chancellor and the Chancellor of the day. Bear in mind that the 2035 pledge is 2 general elections away. And as a government, we want more of that money spent with British companies, using that defence spending as an engine for growth.
Your sister party in Spain, Pedro Sanchez, the centre-left government, has taken a very different approach. They've said they want to prioritise things like the Spanish provision of welfare state. And so they won't go for this, and they're going to stick to 2%. Have they not got a point? Are they not being more honest about the trade-offs?
Certainly, some of the Mediterranean NATO states have not been spending sometimes even the 2% level that we previously had. But if you're looking at the UK context in this, comparing ourselves to Spain, the UK's had Russia use chemical weapons on the streets of Salisbury. We've suffered because of their malign activity. We've had their spy ships over our undersea cables that transmit trillions of pounds over the course of a year in terms of business, vital for our economy. We know there are genuine threats to the UK and to our allies. That's why we've got to meet those threats, deter the aggression that's coming and keep our country safe.
Just to explain to the a non-expert, like what about this purchase of F-35s and their use in a particular type of nuclear deterrent? What's the purpose there? And is it not a bit contradictory to say on the one hand we need to spend more because we need more sovereign independence, but then be totally dependent on something that is essentially US technology?
We're adding an air leg to our nuclear deterrent. The RAF will be carrying these weapons in due course when these F-35As arrive, probably towards the end of this decade. And that will be enhancing our capability as a NATO alliance to keep us safe. It helps lock the US further into our NATO security. It supports our friends across Europe. And it provides a bigger headache for Putin. I think, as a defence minister, if at the end of the day I know that Putin's come off worse than we have, that's a good day at the office for me.
Okay, we're just taking up nuclear weapons. You may have seen last night, Newsnight covered the story of British veterans who say they and their children suffered lifelong health problems witnessing the nuclear tests in the 1950s and 60s, and our coverage today was raised in Parliament.
Last night, Newsnight covered the Daily Mirror's 3-year investigation of the nuke blood scandal. So as a fierce supporter of these men and their families who she's met with me, will the Right Honourable Lady agree this Armed Forces Week that time is now of the essence? These elderly veterans deserve answers, justice and an apology.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, as my honourable friend said, Mr Speaker, I commend her for the campaigning work that she's done on this issue, and I have met with some of those affected, and I know the strength of feeling on this. And we're looking into unresolved questions regarding medical records, Mr Speaker, as a matter of priority.
I just wanted to play you a clip from last night's show, which is a veteran, Brian Unthank, and Steve Pearce, who was born with severe disabilities after his father witnessed the nuclear test. Let me just show this to you.
We keep getting pushed aside. We keep getting, too busy.
We need them to make good on the promises they made us. We need them to keep their word. When I met Keir Starmer, he came up with lines like, your campaign is our campaign. We back you 100%. When I explained my worries for my son, who hadn't been diagnosed with anything then, after the meeting, he took me aside and he said, as a father, I really get it. So I'd like to meet him again and says, Satya's now got a condition. Should you now be helping us? You said you'd meet us. Come on, meet us.
So are you and the PM going to meet the likes of Brian and Steve?
Well, certainly I know that my ministerial colleague, Al Carnes, who's the Minister for Veterans, who looks after this area, is meeting the campaign groups regularly. As a constituency MP before the election, I was campaigning on behalf of nuclear test veterans to get the information they need. That's why, as a government, we've committed to review the files held by the MOD and the Atomic Weapons Establishment. We'll be making an announcement in the summer about what that review has found. I want to see justice for the folks that were exposed to nuclear testing all those decades ago, because we're running out of time for many of them still being around. But we know the consequences of many of those people participating in those tests are carried not just by the individuals, but their family members. That's why we want to work out what we can declassify and share and get to the heart of trying to get justice for those individuals.
Minister Luke Pollard, thanks for joining Newsnight.
Thank you.
Well, let's just put some of that quickly to Alistair Burt. I mean, you were deeply involved in the infected blood reviews. What do you make of the government's approach to this particular, I think, call it a scandal?
I think the sort of background that the infected blood scandal illustrated, the determination of campaigners who believed they hadn't been told the truth, and it was ultimately revealed after decades that that was correct. That's the background to this. Many MPs, I've got my name on an early day motion years ago for nuclear test veterans. it's always been assumed, yes, we'll do a review, the government will do a review, but now the lack of trust is so great. I suspect the best way for the government to deal with this is introduce an independent element into their current review of records, people unconnected with government who will be able to go over the papers, so that we'll try and avoid what happened with the infected blood, which is when people who'd been in charge of the records for many years had to come forward and confess that people previous to them had been lying. And it's that background of distrust of post office infected blood which is at the background, and the government will need to move quickly to dispel that sense.
Okay, powerful stuff. Let's move on to the NATO summit, Poppy. I mean, you class yourself as a fiscal hawk, and yet on the yet 5% of GDP.
Well, look, there's only one man in foreign policy that actually matters, and that man is Donald Trump. And so what Donald Trump says he wants, we just have to go along with it. And I think that's,
it's an interesting turn of phrase, that, because are we going along with it? Because he won't be here in 2030, and this is all for 2035. There's a bit of theatre about this.
If it's good enough for Mark Rutte, he called him daddy. I think that's clearly the mind that a lot of people have about. Right. And let's be clear, this is not just Trump saying what the Americans actually want out of NATO now. This has been a long-standing concern. Even Barack Obama was complaining about the Europeans free loading on American military support, which is true. You don't have a club where one member pays 2/3 of the dues. That just doesn't make sense. So I think there's actually very little wiggle room for Keir Starmer, and I do understand there's not a lot of money to go around.
Okay, you use wiggle room, which is wiggle room in terms of diplomatic relations with the US. Diane, wiggle room is also used in terms of public spending, and you have this situation where this is like an extra percentage point of GDP.
It's extraordinary, billions and billions, and a lot of that money, if not most of that money, will actually go to American armaments companies.
They say that it's all going to go to factories in Lancashire.
They're just saying that. The money will go to American armaments companies. That is where the billions will go. And, I don't wish to, disagree with you at all. But, the elements in number 10 at least, who still think we're a global superpower, and that's why we're going to throw all this money away.
Alistair, you're former foreign minister, deep expertise in the Middle East. I just wanted to pick your mind. It's been an incredible few days, given where we were on Sunday.
Yes.
What is your take on what has actually happened between Iran and Israel? And where it leaves us now?
I think the speed of change that we've seen over the last week reinforces all those who, like the minister, like Luke Pollard, emphasise this is a very, very uncertain world and things can change very quickly. And the degree of threat that might face us, it has been increased with what we've seen in Ukraine, and things can change very quickly. So I think people are right to identify that. Also, you would have to be very churlish if you didn't admit that it had been a good week for Donald Trump. You may not like a lot of things about Donald Trump, but he's taken action in relation to Iran that most of the region either covertly or openly thinks is a good thing. And that's because Iran has destabilised the region over many decades in lots of different places, Iraq, Lebanon, and people know this. And that threat has, in a sense, the bluff has been called, has been of significance, then followed by a ceasefire. The point, of course, to come is what to do next, because interventions in the region have not gone well in the past. Now, does Donald Trump have a chance to change that and to deliver a proper ceasefire between Iran and Israel, get them to completely descale their enmity and begin to turn the region towards Palestine, and get the grand bargain that so many people have looked for, that would create a new Middle East and would hand him the Nobel Peace Prize, quite genuinely, for doing something that people have looked for.
Donald Trump is scarcely that sophisticated. It's been a good week. Will it be a good month? Will it be a good year?
That's perfectly fair. We don't know.
We don't know.
I just want to get in, because the papers are quite interesting in terms of... I just want to show you the papers really quickly. The Guardian, Starmer in denial over scale of Labour MPs' welfare. So we have the Times first. Let's go with that, of course, which was Rebel MPs want regime change. That's in the UK. Starmer in denial over scale Labour MPs' welfare rebellion. Telegraph, Starmer set to back down on benefits. And the iPaper, Starmer ready to retreat on benefit cuts to end rebellions. I'm going to give the last words to you, Dan. 10 seconds. Are they going to back down?
Let us hope so, for the sake of so many disabled people. Let's hope he'll back off.
Well, there we go. There we have it from one of the rebels. Paddy will be here tomorrow. That's all from us. Good night.